Today, I'm excited to welcome Lotta, author of More Than a Bit Black, Memoirs of a Black Woman's Child, to the podcast. Welcome to the Bitcoin Edge, Lotta.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
It's wonderful to have you. So, before we get to Bitcoin and your book, tell us a little bit about your background, where you were born, where you're living.
Sure. So I was born in Augusta, Georgia, and I was raised in Atlanta, but I grew up all throughout the metro because my mom was a teacher and she worked in DeKalb County, which is a large county a little bit east of the city. And so I grew up there. My mom was a single mom. I guess my origin story is a little unique in the sense that my mom was in her 20s and she had started having some complications. She went to the doctor, and the doctor told her that she needed to have a child if she wanted to have one because she was starting menopause really early. And she was like, okay, well, I don't have a husband, I don't have a boyfriend. What should I do? So she and my dad were best friends. And my dad was like, a little sidebar, my dad is Nigerian. So his perspective is a little bit different on like family. And so he was suggesting to my mom, he was like, well, I think children should know who their parents are if you're going to, have a child. My mom was like, well, she's a little jazzy, I would say. And she said, well, if you're going to have an opinion about what I do, then you should donate your sperm. And he did. So I was not conceived through intercourse. My mom went through IVF to have me, and this was like 30 years ago. So I kind of think she was a little bit of a renegade in doing that. And then she decided to raise me by herself. My father was in my life, but more so as my mom's best friend, and he was my father. So I don't want to minimize his contributions by saying a father figure because he was my father, and because of their friendship, he was very supportive of me my entire life. However, when my mom passed away, that's kind of where I started to have this catharsis and this metamorphosis of self. And yeah, so I wrote a book about it just to kind of help me get through the grief and just, I guess, just to tell the story that my mom never got a chance to hear. And so yeah, that's my story. I apologize if I'm choppy.
No, it's a good to get an idea of where you're coming from because we're going to discuss your book quite a lot. And you're living in El Salvador at the moment. Tell us about that.
Yes. Okay. So, um, my husband and I, we were living in Atlanta. We love Atlanta. Like, I feel as a Black person, Atlanta is a very unique space in the United States because there's been a lot of Black wealth there since Reconstruction. Like, there's a lot of Black power in Atlanta, and so I grew up with this sense of pride in myself and a sense of pride in how I was raised and everything that my mom sacrificed to make sure that I had a quality life. Well, I started noticing that things were getting a little bit shaky and it felt uncomfortable. And the anecdote between my family and I is that I got tired of spending $6 for mangoes. I just didn't understand why mangoes would cost so much. And I would go to the farmer's market. I didn't really do the separation between organic or inorganic. I was honestly just trying to eat as well as I could for what I could afford. And my husband and I, we started doing carnivore. And then after carnivore, we kind of transitioned to caveman. And that's when we were like, okay, the only way for us to really afford to eat the way that we want to eat is we have to distribute the meat. So my husband started working with farmers, and he became a kind of like a node in the Southeast for meat distribution. So we were doing grass fed, grass finished beef and lamb and goat. Oh, there was chicken. I was like, there was a bird there, and chicken. So we started living like that, and then we started realizing that okay, things are getting really, really expensive, and we just decided we were like, okay, President Bukele had done I guess he was speaking to the military, and in his speech, he was talking about El Salvador being a place where people who feel persecuted can come and experience freedoms. And that was just right up our right up our alley. So we just packed up, sight unseen, and we moved here. So
Cool. How cool
yeah,
and how
so
brave.
thank you, thank you. We've been here for going on a year, and it's awesome. We don't plan on leaving.
Wonderful. And did Bitcoin have something to do with that?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Bitcoin is since my mom passed. Bitcoin has been. I'm trying to find a way to describe it because Jesus is the light of my life and the possessor of my soul. Everything in my life revolves around serving the Lord. That's ultimately my number one everything. But since my mom passed, it feels like God opened a door for me to see Bitcoin and understand Bitcoin in a way that made my service to him and my desire to be a disciple really, really strong. Honestly, ever since I understood Bitcoin from an like from the perspective of the ethos of it, because I am not into tech, not into math, not into economy or economics. Forgive me, I'm not into any of that. I like girly things and homemaking and getting my nails done. Like I am not into anything or computer science. I'm not into any of that. But I understood what Bitcoin could do for people like my mom. That was ultimately it. I realized, like, oh, wow, my mom, I think God's timing is perfect. So I don't want to say that my mom went to an early grave. I don't want to say that. But my mom was fairly young when she passed. She passed a few months shy of her 52nd birthday. So it was just like, okay, my mom worked her entire life. Like she was a year away from retiring at 30 years in education. She had a PhD. She was happy to be a teacher. And it was like she owned her own home. She owned her home was owned on like had land to it. It wasn't like a townhouse or anything. So it was just like she'd done everything that she was supposed to do. But she passed away stressful and in pain, and well, she wasn't stressed when she passed, but she was in pain and she suffered. And I realized that it was purposeful. And Bitcoin kind of opened that door for me to see what's true, what's being propagandized to you, what do you really believe? And in that, it became like, okay, so they're lying to me about my food. They're lying to me about my skincare. They're lying to me about my healthcare. They're lying to me about what beauty is. They're lying to me about the standard of beauty. They have been lying to me my entire life. Like, I'm a 90s baby, so I remember going to school and them introducing standardized tests. Like, okay, this is the year we're going to do standardized testing. And I remember being excited to prove that I can do this. I'll be in the 99th percentile. I can do it. And then I went to school, I followed all of the rules, never got in any type of administrative discipline or any of that. I followed the path that my mom followed. And I was like, wait a minute, if I keep doing this, I'm not gonna have a husband, I'm not gonna have time to have a baby. They lied to me about birth control. Everything's a lie. And I was thinking about in scripture in the Ecclesiastes where he talks about like all of this is meaningless. Everything is meaningless. And it's just kind of like, okay, yeah, it is, but what does have meaning? And it's like your food has meaning and what you put into your body, how much time you spend in the sun, how you interact with nature. That is all meaningful. I guess it shifted my time preference.
Yeah, you brought up some really good points there, and there's some deep rabbit holes down there. Tell us more about your Bitcoin journey.
Sure, 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 sure. I love it because, like I was telling you, I'm such a girly girl, and so it's kind of a love story in my mind. The first time I'd ever heard about Bitcoin was in 2012 from my best friend in high school. He he was ahead of the curve. Like he was so brilliant and so funny that he would say things and I just never took him seriously. So he was like, we were getting ready for graduation and he said, it's so stupid what people are doing with this graduation money. Take that money and put it in, buy some Bitcoin, put it into something serious. And I remember looking at him going, you're not going to tell me that I've waited to graduate and be able to get this Bed Bath and Beyond like comforter set. Like I have my room, my dorm is going to be decked out Like, this is the most important thing. And he was just like, that is so stupid. You're going to regret this. And even though I don't regret it because my dorm room was so cute and everybody came to hang out there, he was right. He was right. That was free money. I'd earned free money. And then I just kind of spent it. And then in 2015, I heard about it again under completely different circumstances. I was dating a guy who I didn't know at the time because my mom raised me very sheltered. It was just her, right? So she had to trust me to be responsible. She had to raise me to take accountability. So there were certain behaviors that she was not okay with, and there were certain things that she didn't tolerate or allow. So I was very I don't want to say very sheltered because there are kids who are much more sheltered than I was. However, I grew up very sheltered. And I was dating this guy, and I didn't know that he was in recovery when we started dating. And throughout the course of our relationship, he ended up relapsing. I didn't realize that at all. I overheard him talking to a friend, if you can call it that, and they were talking about how they could buy any drug from anywhere in the world and they could use Bitcoin to purchase it. And it was basically like a way that the police couldn't trace it to them. I don't know if I still haven't explored that. That's a little an area of trauma that I haven't really got into to know if he was telling the truth or not. But from that time, I just remember thinking like, okay, so Bitcoin is how drug dealers and druggies like get drugs. Like, okay, I don't really, that's not really my wheelhouse. I'm trying to graduate. At that point in time, I was really, really focused on being a doctor and doing everything I needed to get into medical school. I wanted to go to medical school out of the country. So I was really, really fixated on just graduating. I wasn't thinking about Bitcoin or even what he was doing. But then he passed away. He ended up overdosing. And in him overdosing, we were living together and he had taken our rent and put the money into Bitcoin in order to buy more drugs. Well, at the time, it's like, oh, okay, so that money's gone. Like, I can't get my rent money back. Like, I can't get my deposit back. Like, it was a very stressful time. And I was trying to graduate from college. It was literally, he died 2 days before the first day of my last semester. And then the next year, my mom passed away. And when my mom passed away, it was just kind of like, okay, I don't have any siblings. My mom wasn't married. I'm the beneficiary of her estate. What does that mean? And I was working in corporate America, and it was weird how I was around people who made the money that my mom left me. Like that was no money to them, but no one could give me any solid advice or solid understanding as to like what to do with this. And honestly, I was afraid to talk about it with people because you don't want people to think that you have something, but you don't want people to manipulate you out of what you have. I wanted to be a good steward with what was left to me because this was everything my mom worked for. It was her retirement that she didn't get a chance to enjoy. So I just wanted to make sure that I was wise with the money. Well, I ended up reconnecting with a guy who was friends with my ex, or the one that passed. We were just chatting. It was nothing serious. And then eventually we started like hanging out more often. And unfortunately, at the time, um, this is when the Black Lives Matter protests were getting really, really amped up. And I didn't agree with Black Lives Matter. I agreed with the slogan, but I didn't agree with the politics behind the organization. And so I was just angry. I was really, really angry. And I was talking about it with my boyfriend at the time. And I was just like, I'm so angry. Like, I feel like my people are being hunted. And I feel like there's no solution. Like, I was living on my own. I owned my own property. Like I had a really nice dog. And so outside looking in, I was living a really nice life. Like I had a nice car, I had a nice job, all of that stuff. But I was so angry and just so hopeless, right? Like I had faith, But when I was looking at what was the media was presenting, and I was going to church and listening to what my pastor was saying, and then I was experiencing life as, a 24, 23, 24-year-old girl or young lady. I don't think I was a woman yet. I just I was just angry and hopeless. And I remember on the verge of tears, like telling him this, like, what do I do? I can't do this. And he sat down and explained the cancel on effect to me. Then he explained like how everything that I'm feeling is manufactured. And it just kind of clicked. And then he had he had been investing in Bitcoin and just celebrated, a really big milestone in his journey. And he was like, I don't really know, if you understand this, or if you have any money or anything. Like, I don't know. And I hadn't shared anything with him. And he was like, but you should really think about putting a little bit of money into Bitcoin. And so I was like, okay, I'll think about it. I'll look into it. So of course I did the traditional what Bitcoin did podcast, tuned in the rabbit hole recap. I'm not into economics, so I couldn't do the investors podcast. No, I just couldn't go there. So after I got my feet wet with those two podcasts, I started buying books and just reading. And the book that really touched me was Thank God for Bitcoin. That one just kind of, I dove in. And then the next one was 21 Lessons by Dergigi. Jumped into that one, and that's when I was like, you know what? So before my mom passed, I would write poetry, and she was always just like, I wish you would publish. I wish you would publish. I just love your writing. But I always took it as like, okay, mom, you think I'm great. Like, whatever. Like, the rest of the world isn't my mom. So I'll just keep my stories. But after reading 21 Lessons, I was just kind of like, okay, maybe I should publish. But if I'm gonna publish, what am I gonna say? Like, what do I have to say? And then I just kind of realized it was maybe a year later. So I had gotten my first like sats. I'd gotten off zero, and then I was talking to my boyfriend at the time, and I was like, okay, I have these investment accounts. Like, what do you think I should do with them? And he was like, well, this guy Michael Saylor is doing this with his company. So I was like, okay, this is actually really cool. So I'll call my advisor and I'll ask him if he'll buy some shares of MicroStrategy, because this will be a great way for me to get my feet wet and also like have a trusted advisor help me. Well, he laughed in my face. He explained to me that MicroStrategy was not the company that I should invest my money in, that I should stick to his plan and just be a good little girl. That's kind of how I took it. And I remember I said, excuse me, are you telling me no? And he said, well, you pay me to advise you. Yes, I'm telling you no. And my mama was a nine ways to skin a cat kind of lady. So I just figured, you know what? For lack of a better term, screw you. I'm taking my money and I'm putting all of it in Bitcoin. Like, if you're not going to do what I ask you to do, I'm going to do what I want to do. And I did. And praise the Lord that I did.
What a
Because
great
it's,
decision, huh?
yes, yeah, like when you realize that you really are an independent woman and you understand why you have this brain, then you can do whatever you want, like, I don't know. I just felt very confident in myself. So I guess that was the beginning of my actual Bitcoin journey, was realizing like, okay, it's not bad. It's not nothing. It's not bad. It's actually beneficial. The money that we're used to having is bad. The system that we're in is bad. The institutions are bad. So, okay, this is what I'm going to talk about. And at the time, there was a scholar named Dr. Claude Anderson. He was going on the Breakfast Club and he was discussing his book called Powernomics. And in that book, he explains, I guess, not explains, he created a system, an economic system or an economic structure that Black Americans could utilize to ethno aggregate and push forward to create a future for themselves within the United States. And he was a little bit disheartened because he was saying that the window for this implementation had passed. So I don't know what it was. Maybe it was the Holy Spirit. Maybe it was just me already having an attitude about the financial advisor. But I went to his website, I bought all of his books, and I read them cover to cover. It was 5 books total, read them cover to cover. And then I realized, I was like, wait a minute. Bitcoin fixes this. Bitcoin fixes this in every single way. Like it fixes it. And that became what I was going to write about. And that's the journey. So the journey began with a big, okay, whoa, wait a minute. They've been lying to us. There is something that we can do. We can fix it. We can change it. All right, like I'm gonna put it in a book. And that's kind of the journey. And right now I moved to El Salvador to kind of see what it's like to live under a Bitcoin standard.
Wow, it's already a wonderful journey,
Thank
and I just want to say I'm sorry for your losses.
you. It's
It's a
okay.
lot to go through. I know. And your book, which I told you I just ordered, it's on
Yes.
Amazon, so I'm excited to read it. It
Yes.
has such a great title, More Than a Bit Black, and the bit is for Bitcoin, and
Yes.
Memoirs of a Black Woman's Child. Tell
Yes.
us more about your book.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I'm excited to talk about it because it was definitely a passion project. Like I said, it all started with poems that I'd written for my mom. And I was really going to tell the story of my mom because I thought my mom's story, even though it wasn't unique, I thought it was really cool. Like, my mom was the oldest daughter of 6, and she was raised by a man who had made a career, I guess a career seaman, but he was an officer. Like, he had titles and all of that stuff. But unfortunately, he suffered from a lot of the same issues that a lot of Black men battle with. And I think one of them, even though he was a great father and an excellent provider, he wasn't necessarily a good husband to my grandmother, even though she would say different. She would say otherwise. But his exploits led to him being murdered by the husband to the woman he was stepping out on my grandmother with. And the reason why this is such a big deal, and I have a poem about it in my book called A Lesson on Forgiveness. When I was 5, my mom, we were at the grocery store. My mom was taking me to go spend the summer with my grandmama. And we were coming out of the grocery store, and my mom walks up to this lady and goes, do you need a ride home? And she said, um, I do, but I can't ask you. And I remember looking at my mom and being like, what are you doing? Like, let's go. I want to go to my grandma's house. And we ended up taking her home. And then when she got out of the car, I was like, Mom, who was that? And she goes, that's the woman your grandfather was killed for.
Hmm.
And it was just kind of like, okay, whatever. But thinking about that it became a core memory. And it's interesting because once I became a like woman, I was living on my own, my mom wasn't around, I realized just how much forgiveness that took for my mom to have. And I just kind of thought that was so fascinating. So I wanted to tell my mom's story. But by the time had gotten super serious about it, my mom had passed and my life was completely different. So then I figured, well, instead of telling my mom's story, my mom was a teacher. Why don't I use her story to teach others about Black culture, about what it means to come from a Black woman, what it means to relate to life through the lens of a Black woman, and not just the Black woman that is propagandized to the media, because the Black women that are propagandized, right, whether they're really successful or really articulate, or whether they're, a little bit more I don't know another way of saying it, but if they present very as promiscuous or very ignorant, or whatever stereotypes that they play up, my mom didn't fit either of those, any of that. She was nothing like that. And what's interesting is all of the women in my family, none of them fit that. And when I go and I make friends and my friends' moms, none of them fit that. So it was just kind of like, well, wait a minute. The Black women that we see are not the Black women that I know. And when I talk to more Black people, they agree. And it was just kind of like, okay, well, then that's what we need to talk about. We need to find a way to bridge the gap between Americans so that we can get the race stuff over with and we can really work on a change, right? We can really find a way to make it to where people can coexist. And you don't have to get bombarded with race, 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 race. Like, yeah, race is there. And if you have an understanding of it, you can just move forward, like it's an uncomfortable topic, but I think it's uncomfortable because people personalize things and they personalize language instead of acknowledging that language is a freedom of expression. Language is how you express yourself. I think they take language as if it's some type of weapon, or they act as if the words that people use indicate, which, I mean, scripture says the words that you use indicate your heart. But I think there's something else to that, because that is true. The words that you use reflect the things that are in your heart. But I think it also relates to the way that you hear things, because the way that you receive that language, all it touches your heart as well. And if you're reacting from a heart place, then there's just going to be discourse. There's never going to be a common ground. So I wrote the story I wrote the book as an homage to literature and as an homage to expression. I'm really big into, like, English was my favorite subject, but of course, having a single mom, and my mom was Black, she was like, remember, you're Black. So you writing or you studying history, unless you're going to be a lawyer, it's not going to be worth your while. I danced ballet. That was my form of expression. I loved to dance ballet. That's what I was trained in. But I remember my mom she was like, you're not going to be a ballerina. Like dance is not that's not going to be your bread and butter. So it's a nice hobby. It keeps you in shape, but that's not who you are. And I remember I was like, well, you know what, mama, you are just going to have to watch down from heaven, because I'm going to be a writer. I'm going to write. I'm going to express myself. So talking about it with my husband, and I was doing all of this research for the book. And he was like, it seems like when Black people start talking about the things that you talk about, it doesn't end up well for them. And I was like, you know what? That's true. And I had just overheard a Clubhouse conversation where someone was like, Bitcoin is a Trojan horse. And I said, well, if I'm going to teach if I'm going to teach about my mom's life, and I'm going to teach people through her life, and I know Bitcoin is the solution, I'm going to make a Trojan horse, and especially if it's dangerous. So the book it's written in a way to which if you look at the title, you're instantly turned away if you're not interested in the race discussion. It's an instant, I don't want to deal with that. Okay, great. It's not for you. Don't worry about it. You don't have to read it. And then it's like, well, okay, I'm curious. I want to read more about it. So then you read more about it, and then you get a plethora of understanding. You go through grief and the metamorphosis of thought that happens when you're grieving. Then there's poetry that talks about womanhood and love and sex and understanding yourself and faith. And then there are poems that express anger. So I was one of my early readers. He said, there's so much anger in this book. Like, you are angry. And I was like, yes, that was the goal. Like, James Baldwin is one of my favorite just scholars. I wouldn't just classify him as a writer or an essayist or a poet. I think he was a scholar. And I think the way that he articulated his point was just so angsty, and I wanted to channel that. But then I love Langston Hughes, and how the poems that came out of the Harlem Renaissance were very, they were a lot, it was questioning, and it was, you know, this force for you to check your soul and check the way that things make you feel. Like, why do these words make you feel like this? Like, why do you interact with things this way? But then I also wanted to articulate Dr. Claude Anderson's point. So the middle of the book, and the most important part of the book, is that chapter. It's the chapter where I really, really dive in and explain how Black America can utilize Bitcoin to ethno aggregate and act as a country within a country. Because that's the one thing that's what makes Black Americans unique from anyone else on the planet, actually, is that America is our home country. Like slavery is so far back. And once you go into the ancient understanding of civilizations and how a lot of people from Western Africa were like really, really good sailors and really, really good with maritime exploration. And it could be argued that they were the original Americans that kind of, uh, adapted or evolved into what we consider Native Americans now, or the Indians. Like, I think there is an argument there if you go down that rabbit hole. So I thought it was very, very interesting that one thing that Black Americans never really had an opportunity to do was be a part of the financial system. And we were never able to ethno aggregate. Like, we were ethno aggregating under what people would call segregation, was an opportunity for us to ethno aggregate. However, because it was, I guess I want to say, it pushed back against the status quo, it pushed back against the narratives and the theater that was representative of Blackness. I think because of that, we were just kind of like psychologically tormented by violence into submission, and just kind of doing things that are anti us, like things that go against what's best for us. And so, yeah, I just, that's where the book came from. Just it's an amalgamation of all of that. But the primary point is that Bitcoin fixes the problems that are happening within Black America.
So tell us a little bit more about Bitcoin in the book. What I'm hearing is that if African Americans use Bitcoin, they have an opportunity to change their future.
Yes. So currently, Black. Okay. So when you say African American, it kind of it, it it separates who we're speaking about. Like, I have to be an African American because my father is Nigerian. So technically, I'm a Nigerian American. But I was raised Black. That's the whole Black woman's child. Like, I am what my father is because of the American standard. But my mom is who raised me, and that's who she identified as Black. And so that's, I was raised Black. And so the reason why I make the point to explain it is that African Americans have an understanding of the world and a relationship with the world that Black Americans don't have, in the sense that African Americans, in some way, can trace themselves back to a home country. They are a part of the immigrant class. Black Americans are not. And because Black Americans are not, Black Americans are currently the we are, people don't agree. It's nasty language, and people feel that they don't agree with it because, like we were talking about earlier, about how the language can feel like a personal attack. But in all honesty, Black Americans are the population within the United States that don't really produce anything. We are more so consumers. So we are the socioeconomic underclass. Like, Black Americans are the underclass. Therefore, it is being propagandized. We're being propagandized to. And because we're being propagandized to, it's easier to follow suit than to buck the system. And by following suit, that means that if I do things this way, I will get this in. And we have people that they tout in the community as leaders. For example, like with President Obama, and how President Obama was admonishing Black American men for not supporting Kamala Harris the way that they supported him. Well, that's because Obama was a symbol. Obama was a symbol used to make sure that Black Americans could no longer have the argument that things haven't changed since slavery. Because, hey, look, you have a African American president. But in him being an African American president, he did absolutely nothing for Black Americans. What he did was things for the immigrant class, because as an African American, he has a relationship to the immigrant class that Black Americans don't have. So by being Black American, James Baldwin talks about how language is Black language, it was never considered language. But the reason why Black language wasn't considered language is because it by creating Black language means you have a Black culture, and by having a Black culture, you have an autonomy. And it was an autonomy that was threatening to people within the white class. And I believe that that's a part of the reason why Black Americans are being conditioned to believe that the only thing they can do is what they are told to do. And so during COVID, there was this big pushback in that, where you had a lot of Black entrepreneurs and you had a lot of Black people supporting Black owned businesses as a way of keeping money within the Black community. Every ethnic group within the US does this. Every ethnic group within the US has a system that they work in a way to where the money benefits their community. Black Americans don't have that. And because we don't have that, we end up spending our money out of systems and spending our money in places, or supporting things that are anti us and anti, progress for Black Americans. It's like it's a mask, it's like it's not real. It's not real progress. And so what I'm offering, what I believe that Bitcoin can do, is change the incentives for Black Americans and how Black Americans relate to wealth, how Black Americans relate to life in the US, how Black Americans relate to one another. I'm not suggesting, there are people who suggest that Black Americans should be given reparations in the sense that they should be given land to just go be Black, but those are all very, very idealistic desires, but they're not real, right? It's more propaganda. It's never going to happen. It's just ways to make Black people look stupid to the masses, right? But Bitcoin changes that, because you don't have to trust one another. So you can create a circular economy and live within the circular economy, but you don't have to trust anyone. You don't have to. It changes the incentives. And if you change the incentives, but keep the infrastructure that's propelled our community, if we change the incentives but keep the infrastructure, which is the things that make Black people unique and the things that make Black people powerful, we can create a circular economy within the United States so that Black Americans are represented and can work together with each other and with white Americans. Like, the beautiful, and I kind of talk about this in my book, the beautiful thing about Bitcoin is, because it's a trustless system, because you don't it's more verified, and it's more like anyone can get a node, like anyone can build a node. You can, save up some money for miners. You can find ways to build miners and create, like, there's a level of creativity to it that allows people interoperability for people anywhere and everywhere. So you can be an ally without, having to leave your all white neighborhood, or you can be an ally and be in South Africa, or you can be an ally and be in Australia or in China. Like, it's not about what your community is and how your community is defined. It's about what the individuals within the community do to make sure to keep the community connected. And that's something that Black Americans haven't had. We haven't had an opportunity for us to have a community, have a circular economy, and not worry about violence. And that was one of the reasons why I love El Salvador, or I love the idea of El Salvador and wanted to move here. Did a lot of research and the understanding of how the people in El Salvador really relate. There's a relation and struggle between Black Americans and the non-ruling class in El Salvador, especially when you think about the violence and gang activity and plantation sharecropping, all of that. There is a relation and struggle, and when you can look at those parallels and see how, okay, this is what Bitcoin is doing, and it's a slow process, right? Like, all of the podcasts and everything that I was watching made me feel like Bitcoin adoption in El Salvador was just like, boom, everyone's doing it, everyone's got it. If you don't have Bitcoin in El Salvador, you're not in vogue. And then I got here and I realized, like, oh, wait a minute. There are still people, like, people have to change within themselves before Bitcoin can really do what it does. Like, I was really disheartened when I got here, and I would talk to certain people about Bitcoin, and they, like, assumed that I was trying to scam them, or I was trying to take something from them, or I was trying to flaunt my wealth, or it was as if, like, the first, I would say, 3-4 weeks, I kind of shied away from even speaking about Bitcoin to, like, locals, because I didn't want them to think bad about me. And then I realized, like, oh, wait a minute, that's not a them problem. And that's not a me problem. That's a Bitcoin community, Bitcoin understanding, Bitcoin relation problem. So many people, fortunately for me, and I don't say this tongue in cheek, I really mean what I say. Fortunately for me, in my mom passing, I learned how people really, really see people that they don't know, right? You think you see a stranger and you're like, oh, that's a person. Like, I'm gonna respect them. I'm gonna treat them well, whatever. But then you don't know anything about that person, and it's not for you to judge, right? But what I found when I was in a situation where I didn't need my job, but I wanted to go to it because I liked it. I liked what I did. That became threatening to people because how dare you? Like when I started dating outside my race, it was like, well, you whatever you say isn't real because you're not even dating a black man, and it's like, wait a minute, that doesn't have anything to do with anything. So when I moved here and I realized, like, oh, wait a minute, there are people who like don't get spoken to. Like, you live in a neighborhood, you drive through the neighborhood and you're a Bitcoiner and you have a nice car and you have nice clothes and you eat really nice organic foods, but you don't speak to people. Like, are you really evangelizing? And there is a lot of really cool things going on in El Salvador with Bitcoin, and a lot of people doing a lot of great work. People are changing the narratives. People, I don't want to ever discredit any of the work that's being done here because it's beautiful. However, people have to do the work within themselves in order to understand Bitcoin. And eventually they'll be humbled, whether it's you had a lot and then you lost it, or you had little and then you gained a lot, but then you lost the respect of your family. Like, there's a humbling process. And after after the book and after trying to promote, Bitcoin to Black America and getting a lot of pushback, being told that I was too radical, being told that, Black people don't read, so unless you're gonna make it a podcast or make it an audiobook, no one's gonna care. After having all of that pushback, I realized the reason why people in general, not just Black Americans, but people in general, aren't getting it is because they haven't done the hard work. Every single day, Bitcoin humbles you. Like, if you hold Bitcoin for a substantial amount of time, it humbles you every single day. It humbles the way that you think, the way that you speak, the people you speak to. It's this ever going, like, it's this continuous humbling. And being humbled is not fun. It doesn't feel good. But once you get through it and you do the hard work is the proof of work, right? You don't have to worry about anything, because if you do the hard work, your heart will it'll your truth will be reflected in all of you do. And then you'll have a more utilitarian way of utilizing Bitcoin and understanding it. Sorry for the long-winded answer, but I think that's the problem. I think people don't want to do the hard work. It's easier to follow the status quo and complain and have a problem. It's way, way, way harder to do the hard work, to, step aside and not be a part. It's really difficult.
Yeah, that's true on so many levels, and you gave so many great examples. And I understand better now about your book, and I would just recommend people really read that to get a better understanding. You talked about that you want to change the Black community, the African American community. Tell us more about how Bitcoin has changed you, so that
Oh,
people can understand how great it's been for you.
yeah. So honestly, okay, when I found Bitcoin, I'm laughing because I'm thinking about how my husband would describe me. When before Bitcoin, I was like the number one person you would want to advertise for and to, because I took it all in. I was on every social media platform. I was incredibly depressed. I was suicidal. I wanted to be promiscuous. I wanted to live fast, not die young, but I wanted to be out there. I was like very liberal minded. Not saying there's anything wrong with it, but I was like very liberal minded. Like, my friend was like, hey, I'm pregnant. And it's like, what are we doing? Are we keeping it? Like, what are we doing? Type of liberal minded, and now I'm just like, oh, because I'm in the family planning process, and I could just would hate someone to say that to me, But that was my mindset. It was like, I'm gonna go marching in the street. I'm angry. You don't understand me. I don't have time for this. Like, very much. I'm a proud, or strong, independent Black woman. I don't need anybody. That was me, right? Oh my goodness, always smiling in the camera, ready to pose. Like, yeah. And then I got Bitcoin, and the first part was paying a financial advisor to tell you no, and he has no blood relation to you. It was like, hold on, there's something wrong with that. Then it was like, wait a minute, let me stop looking at things with emotions and let me really see, like, when they kill unarmed Black men or unarmed Black women and they put it all over the media and all over social media, what are they really saying? Because I live in a Black area. Like, I remember leaving Atlanta and traveling to Monterey, California. And I was like, whoa, there are really like areas where people have never met a Black person. Like, they don't know Black people. They're interested and they're intrigued, but and that was like coming up in Atlanta, that's completely unfathomable. Like, wait, what? Like, I'm from Atlanta, where I know people like travel away from Black people who are moving into their neighborhood. I'd never been to a place where like the whole town, like nobody, So it was just kind of like, okay, wait a minute. Like, so there's no point in being angry because people really don't understand. Like, some people's only relation to Blackness or Black people is through what they see on social media or what they listen to in music. Like, Michael Jackson is really some people's only like Black person. That's the Michael Jackson and Beyonce. What does that mean? Like, what does that really mean? Then it became a sense of like, okay, well, if they're lying to me about the money, what they're telling me doesn't actually match up to what's happening. Maybe the food is a problem. So then I went and I changed my diet. My husband was like, let's go carnivore. Jumped all like feet first, went straight into that. Started feeling excellent. Started, oh my goodness, just the way that I saw the world, the way that I saw myself, that changed. And then it became like, okay, so there, what else can I do? So then I started teaching dance, and I started using my time at like I think it's Bitcoin Standard, but I was listening to a talk with Safe Dean, and he was talking about how the future, you have to like set aside for the future. That's the more important focus. And my mom was definitely like that, right? Because if she weren't, then when she died, I would be in a situation like a lot of my friends were, who were in debt, and their parents were in debt, and they didn't have anything, and they lost their house and everything else. I didn't lose anything. So it was like, okay, well, wait a minute. My mom was a Bitcoiner without even knowing about Bitcoin. So, okay, let me change all of this. Now I'm going to start I don't have to make any money to do this. I don't have to make any money. I'm going to go and teach, right? And in doing that, I remember I had a student, and I was teaching dance, and she was so sad. And I said, "What's going on with you?" And she said, "I'm just sad because my sister was kidnapped." Just that's exactly how she said it, right? "I'm just sad because my sister was kidnapped." And in my mind, something didn't make sense. It didn't make sense that this little girl was in school and her sister had been kidnapped, but like we are out looking for her. Like, what are we doing? Like, she's been kidnapped. And I remember going to my boss and telling her, I was like, I don't know how to teach her. Like, what do we do? Her sister's been kidnapped. And she said, "Oh, honey, you're teaching in areas that are so poor. These kids aren't being kidnapped. Their parents are selling them." And I was just like, wait a minute, wait a minute. No one is talking about this. We're not talking about the things that really matter. We're talking about people's rights to abortion. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about the fetus. Yes, fetus, that's important, sure. But if we're going to talk about the rights to reproduction, can we find ways or create programs? And I'm not saying government programs, I'm just saying, like, can we do something to extend the conversation to where we're offering resources for people? If your sister is being sold and your parents are telling you she's being kidnapped, how does that impact you when you're 22? Right? Like, what type of woman are you going to become? Well, we're not having those conversations because they're not really important. They're not the money makers. And I guess that's how Bitcoin changed me in the biggest way. It started with the food and started with the little life changes, but then it happened to where the way that I related to the world changed, the way I thought about the world changed. Like I don't want to have meaningless conversations. Like, let's have deep conversations. Let's talk about the ugly stuff. Let's let's duke it out. Like, my in-laws are always teasing my husband and I because they're like, y'all are always fighting. And it's like, no, 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 no. We're not fighting at all. Like I said, I was a liberal. I was very liberal minded, and Bitcoin changed me to where I don't necessarily care to subscribe to labels. I care about the conversations. I care about the perspective. I care about learning and growing and how I can give back to others who don't have the opportunities. And then my husband, he's coming from a very conservative Republican, bootstraps kind of family. So we have these like existential conversations, and we're both very passionate about our stances. But what's very beautiful is at the end of the conversation, at the end of the discourse, we both leave with this understanding of like, oh, wait a minute, but this is how Bitcoin can fix this, and this is how Bitcoin can change that, and this is how Bitcoin can shift this. So I guess it made me. My grandmama used to joke, and I say my grandmama because I used to tell people that like my mama is my dad and my grandmama is my mama, like, and my dad's just my mom's best friend. Like, that's just how that's like a summation of my life, right? And my grandmama used to tell me, once you understand what God means to your life, you're going to be a problem to the world. And then it was just like, okay, but when I understood Bitcoin, that's why I believe God put it in my life. That's why I thank you, God, for Bitcoin was such a big deal for me. Once I understood it from that perspective, it changed. It made me more, I don't want to say radical, but it made me passionate to the point to where like, okay, if you don't want to have a hard conversation, like I have a poem in my book called Working with White Women. It's a very jarring title. It's very jarring. And the poem kind of articulates a frustration that a lot of Black women have when it comes to relating with white American women. And I learned this by working for a German company. I worked for a German company, and the Germans and the Dutch and the French, the Spanish, they were never mean. They were not a problem. But if you really wanted to have a bad day, let a white manager piss off a white manager. Like, you're going to have a problem, right? And the poem talks about that. That's all it's stating. And the reason why I wrote it was to kind of hold up a mirror to be like, hey, if you read this, what do you think about it? How does it make you feel? Well, in turn, a lot of people took offense to it or have taken offense to it. And okay, let's have the discourse. But if you don't want to have the discourse and you just want to like pout and be upset that I say that, then I don't care. I don't care to take the time out to explain myself to you. I don't care. You can think about whatever you want to think about me. That's fine. You're not who I'm meant to speak to. I have a purpose, and Bitcoin has put that battery in my back to where it's like, this, I said what I said, so that's honestly how Bitcoin has changed me. It's made me resilient and tough and unafraid. I used to be ashamed of my blackness. I'll be honest with you. I used to be very ashamed of it. I was ashamed of the fact that in me being black, before I opened my mouth, people assumed everything about me. I had a teacher tell me, "Oh, you must love Obama." And I'm like, "Why? Like, what about him would I love?" Oh, and that's the response. Like, "Oh," or, "Oh, well, you're black, so you must have grown up on welfare. Oh, you're black. Are you the first person in your family to go to college?" Which is funny. The boyfriend who passed away, his mom, she was a pediatrician. She asked me. She said, "So, you're the first person in your family to go to college. Aren't you proud?" And I looked at her and I laughed. And I said, "Man, I don't mean any disrespect, but my mom's a PhD, my father's an MD, and like there are 12 PhDs in my family, and four of them have top government clearance. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. First generation to go to college. As a matter of fact, I'm the first one in my family to not go on to get a master's or any of that. But that's because Bitcoin shifted the incentives. Like, you guys are lying, and then you're paying for the studies and you're paying for the research. So no, like, I'll do my own research, and I believe food is medicine anyway, so that's what we're going to do. So I can be a doctor in my own home. I can raise my own children and be a caretaker. I can be I can be a botanist. I can do anything in my home with my family, and I have strong assets and an asset that incentivizes a lower time preference, and that's how I'm going to live. It's really just that. Like, I guess my Bitcoin journey and my like how Bitcoin has changed me is definitely represented in the move. Picked up, picked up, and I moved. And no one in my family has ever lived outside the country. Or forgive me, my aunt did, but she was dating a military man, so that doesn't count. I just picked up. We'd never been on vacation, never came down here, just packed up and moved. And that's how Bitcoin made my heart tough. It just made me tough.
Well, I love your story. I love that you talk about difficult subjects. It sounds to me like Bitcoin gave you freedom. Bitcoin, for me, I know all of these things are going on and I don't know how to fix them. I know that we can talk about them. And I know at the end of the day, we're all Americans and we need to have these conversations. And that's more important than fighting each other. But unfortunately,
Yes.
yeah. So it's been wonderful chatting with you today. We're right on the hour, and tell us where people can find you.
Sure. So I am exclusively on Noster. I know people say Noster, but I'm from the South, so notes, and other things transmitted on relay. So notes, Noster. So you can find me exclusively on Noster. My handle is at Bitcoin Bell, but I'm at Bitcoin Bell because I'm from the South and proud of it. And South, my grandmother to me was the quintessential Southern belle. Red lipstick, red nails, hats, so I thought of it as an homage to her. Like, yeah, I'm a Southern belle too. So and I love Bitcoin, so I'll be Bitcoin Belle. But there is a Bitcoin Belle who was in the crypto sphere, and she was there earlier. So she's Bitcoin Belle at Bitcoin Belle, but I'm Lotta Bitblaq at Bitcoin Belle. So you'll know it's me. I don't show my face online, so but you'll see my shoulders because in my profile picture I'm waving my the throwaway bouquet. So yeah, you can find me exclusively on Noster. I'm happy to chat with anyone anytime. I'm pretty bubbly, like that's a part of my personality. So I'm always sending out like good mornings and just jumping into other people's conversations and giving my little 2 cents. But yeah, you can find me exclusively on Noster.
Wonderful. And we'll also put a link to your book for anybody interested.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's on Amazon, but if you're one of those anti-Amazon people, you can find it at barnesandnoble.com and Books a Million too.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It was really fun and entertaining, and I love your story.
Thank you so much, Paula. I really appreciate the opportunity and the opportunity to share and chat. Thank you so much. I think what you're doing is so important. And the fact that you offer an opportunity for people to just chat with you, I think it's incredible. And so I wish you nothing but the best. And I pray that your podcast is really, it just takes off to the moon with your podcast.
Thank you. Go Bitcoin.
Yeah, go Bitcoin like that. Your podcast getting bigger is the number go up that we like to talk about.
Exactly.
The good number
Exactly.
go up. Yes. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye bye.